You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. And a special hello to the everydayers and insiders that make this show what it is. I am Steven Willis from the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, joined by John Macon Gillespie, the publisher of Ole Miss on SI. John, we are through another week of fall camp, and honestly, fall camp should probably be wrapping up sometime in the next couple of days. And there's still no resolution officially with Deion Smith, but in my opinion, Ole Miss kind of got a nice report from Chuck Rounsaville, the Ole Miss Spirit.
Yeah, I mean that was, if you're an Ole Miss fan or work for Ole Miss, obviously that was really good news that you came across today. But I don't have any inside information on that whole saga, really. I mean, from Ole Miss's side, a lot of times stuff like that's kind of closed-lipped a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I don't really doubt Chuck on this. I do think that his report makes sense from how these things tend to kind of play out. You know, there's a lot of paperwork involved with compliance and transfers and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, it would make sense if that's kind of where things stand with Deion right now. Obviously we've been told that he's in Oxford. I mean, that's kind of old news anyway, but there was obviously some kind of holdup as to why he hasn't been out at practice. To me, that makes sense. Obviously, I can't verify that one way or the other, but to me, that I don't doubt it at all.
Yeah, when it comes to stuff like this, I do not doubt Chuck Rounsaville, period. Whenever I worked at Ole Miss in 2006, the later part of 2007, it may have been in 2007, I had a job interview in secret that I did with Yahoo Sports. Went up there, interviewed, ended up getting that job. But when I got back to Ole Miss, Chuck met me and said, "How was your interview?" It was that type of deal. That's how plugged in that guy is around the Manning Center. He knows everybody in that building. Yeah.
So, I mean, it is from an Ole Miss perspective. I mean, that is news if you're wanting some kind of update on Deion Smith. It's my opinion that he will obviously eventually play. I don't think that's really much of a question unless something goes haywire somewhere. And that'll obviously be a big boost for the Ole Miss offense whenever that happens.
Yeah, should be really interesting. But until it happens, we wait, and we wait for number 6 to pop up on that roster and figure out what's going to happen from there. Just before everybody asks the question and freaks out, the man's played wide receiver his entire life. He was at LSU playing wide receiver. He's worked with Shea Hodge. There's going to be a package ready by the time the Kentucky game gets here to get him up to full speed.
Yeah, I think so. And, I don't think that's something – well, one, from that perspective, I don't think there's much to worry about as far as him adjusting to Ole Miss and the offense and culture, all that kind of stuff. But two, if you're an Ole Miss fan and you're wondering about – if you're kind of up in arms about his appearance or not, you have to look at your wide receiver room in general right now, too, and realize how blessed you are from that perspective. Because whether Deion Smith plays week 1 or not, or week 2, I guess maybe I should say, or 4 or 5, whatever, you should feel good about where your wide receiver room currently stands. Obviously, Deion Smith would help that a lot. But I've used the term embarrassment of riches a few times when I've been writing about this receiver room, and that's before Smith is officially on the roster. So,
I did a video on Cam Franklin and William Eccles earlier in the week, but this is applicable to Deion Smith as well. There are years when Ole Miss would have been absolutely counting on this player to give them minutes and a large quantity of them. That isn't the case this year.
No. And that's a really good place to be, and that speaks to the depth at a lot of these position groups on this roster, wide receiver being one of those, I think defensive line, like you said, being one of those. Really good, honestly, quarterback, too. I mean, that kind of gets brushed under the rug a little bit sometimes, but there's depth there, too. It's a really good place, and it's not a place that Ole Miss has been in a lot in recent years, I would say. to have this amount of depth, it's a really good place for them to be in.
And you've had people at practice whenever they were in town to do all of that. Anything that you gleaned today that they saw today that got their attention?
Today, there wasn't actually a lot that he got out of it. The viewing session, according to him, today was a little different than what it has been. I'm not exactly sure what he saw, what he didn't. I hadn't had time to catch up with him about that. But this week, he has talked about how impressive the defense has looked, which, I mean, that's kind of been a theme a little bit anyway. But it's Jackson Harris who's been out at practice for us, and he said to me something to the effect earlier this week of this defensive line may be even better than people think they're going to be, which is a little scary because I've been pretty high on them, all summer, and for them to potentially be even better than that, I think says a lot.
One thing's pretty cool. My Insiders Network, people they randomly pop in nuggets of information, and there's a surprisingly talented pool of people that are in there. And they talked about the insider, Tom Vanderford, who's been on this program a little bit, talked about he had been hearing people in his circles that JJ Pegues may be about to break out more than we even know. Everybody's been talking about Walter Nolen. Everybody's been talking about Princely Umanmielen. But apparently JJ Pegues has taken a step to the point where he's made some noise inside that building.
Well, and I even think, too, there's been even a decent amount of focus on Jared Ivey this offseason, right? I mean, media days obviously impacted that some, but him being a veteran guy who's returning, you haven't heard a lot about JJ Pegues. And not that that's a bad thing. I think that's just something that people have overlooked a little bit, that's another veteran piece that's in this rotation or in this starting rotation, I guess I should say, who's really going to make a big impact, I think, this year. And, people obviously look to the newcomers to be difference makers in a sense, but you got to remember too that guys like Ivey and Pegues are coming in with another year in the system, having worked under Pete Golding, and that's only going to be beneficial.
Yeah, and you have a situation with JJ Pegues. Last year, he was the number one defensive lineman on this team, the absolute number one. He's going to be at best the number 3 option on the defensive line once the season gets going. And that is nothing but good news. That's double teams that he's probably not going to get that he had to deal with a year ago.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the wide receiver situation that you give sometimes in talks that, if double teams are focused on someone else, that in this situation with how deep Ole Miss is in some of these spots, it opens up another one of those really talented guys to not have to deal with a double team. And so that, there you go. Pick your poison a little bit.
Yeah, I talk all the time. The secret sauce of Alabama and Georgia, what their secret sauce is on their defense that's been so good, is they have 2 defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen that demand double teams, which means a Will Anderson or somebody like that is getting single blocked on the outside. And of course, any team's going to struggle going against that defensive line. And then when you put 5 stars behind them, obviously you have what you have. Ole Miss, for the first time, has a defensive unit that's kind of in a similar vein. If JJ Pegues can be that second double team with Walter Nolen, all of a sudden Princely Umanmielen and Jared Ivey, they're going against running backs and tight ends and single blocks on the outside. And with the man coverage designed to make the passing windows a little smaller, this could be a very explosive play defense this year, and with a lot of turnovers and things like that.
Yeah, and when you have an offense that right now looks like the way Ole Miss's does, the more you get the ball in their hands, the better it's going to be, right? So the more of those turnovers you force, it just kind of builds on itself a little bit with the positive momentum that depth like this can bring.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. When we come back, we will ask John the storylines for the rest of fall camp going into the Furman game. And we're going to talk about week 0 a little bit as well, as there's going to be real live football played a week from tomorrow. Game Time is the place to get your Ole Miss tickets. They have killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from the seats, and the lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets. There's not a bad seat in Vaught Hemingway Stadium, but Game Time on the app allows you to see exactly what it'll look like from that seat in the stadium before you buy, so you know what you're getting into. They have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation, job loss protection. They just basically take the guesswork out of buying Ole Miss tickets with Game Time. And with this being the most anticipated season in Ole Miss history, I might even be able to help you out with tickets as well. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You know, I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer and fewer games, and the sports just aren't sportsing the way we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep these sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I am in the mood. Maybe I want to bet on Ole Miss's over-under, which is set at 9.5 wins. Maybe Jackson Dart at plus 1,500 to win the Heisman, or Ole Miss at plus 1,500 to win the national title. Now is the chance. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone all day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, it's the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you each and every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss news, analysis, opinions, all streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, John, we're going to change gears just a little bit about the fall camp that has happened and move it to the 2 weeks of fall camp. Well, not necessarily fall camp, 2 weeks of practice until the first game. And what are the storylines that you are going to be paying attention to over the next 2 weeks before Ole Miss goes against Furman?
This is going to sound really gritty for how I'm a big skill position guy. I know that's kind of flashy or whatever, but that's a lot of the storylines I kind of focus on. I think a lot of people are the same way. The offensive line, though, to me right now is one of the biggest storylines, I think, because, I mean, you know, we've spent the first half of my appearance here talking about depth. That's another place that has a lot of depth right now. And the starting five that they're going to run out there against Furman, to me, I'm really interested to see what that's going to look like, because from all accounts that I've heard from Jackson and other people at practice, there's been a lot of rotation right now with the ones, trying to figure out who that set is going to be. I'm really interested in that for sure. That's one of my biggest things. And then again, I'll come back to this too, the running back situation. I'm still interested in that some too. Kind of what the split of carries is maybe going to be in some of these situations, and what backs come in certain situations, down and distance wise. Those are two of the biggest things to me, I think. And three, I guess, too, Deion Smith. I guess that's kind of the storyline in and of itself. But those would be the main things, I think, to pay attention to leading up to August 31st.
Yeah, you know, something really interesting about the offensive line is if Ole Miss, for some reason, does not have the year that everybody expects, and everybody's like, what happened? What is the blame? I do see a path for something really, not necessarily really bad, but something bad for Ole Miss fans happening. And that is the fact that during the spring, intentionally, they did this. They made sure there was no depth chart whatsoever in spring. And reps got divided up all crazy. They were so afraid of that spring transfer portal window that they intentionally made spring basically worthless. So a lot of the work that normally gets done in the spring, especially in a high rep type situation like offensive line, is being pushed to the fall. And all of those reps, now that Ole Miss is trying to figure out a depth chart for Furman, and thank goodness for those 4 non-conference games to start the season, and they're not opening with USC or something like that. But that gives them the ability to do it. But them handling it this way, I can see a situation where the offensive line is different against Furman as it is against Middle Tennessee, and they don't ever quite gel until it's a little bit too late.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's possible. If you made me pick, and this may just be pie in the sky type thinking on my part, but I think the date where they really start looking like we think they can look, gelling, like you said, I think Kentucky is the game where you start to see that. Kind of like you said, the 4 non-conference games. I mean, you've got Wake Forest in there, I guess. Yeah. I mean, going 2
they're
weeks
like
in Salem.
15th, like 15th
Right.
out of 16 or 17 in that conference.
Yeah, I mean that should be a game that you win regardless. They can almost treat it a little bit, and I hate using this term, and when games count, they can use it a little bit like preseason to get ready for the SEC slate. And not every schedule is always set up with that luxury, but Ole Miss's is this year to where they can use some of those first few games to kind of tweak with some lineups and things like that. So. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. And obviously, those games are important because they count. I mean, if you lose to Middle Tennessee, we're talking something completely different in a couple weeks than we are right
I'm
now.
on here with the flamethrower at this
Right.
point.
Yeah. I mean, if something like that happens, but, logically thinking, realistically, that's kind of a time where you can spend to figure some of this stuff out.
Yeah, and we'll see how it looks. It's just one of those things. If you're looking for what could possibly go wrong, if you're looking at hypotheticals, that is something through our own creation at watching this. We saw spring practice into fall look like this. So we'll see how it goes as well. The good news is we're going to change the subject a little bit. Football, real football, is going to be played in about a week.
Yeah, it's I'm a little bit of well, you are too. I think I've used this term with you before. I'm a football junkie, and I'm kind of a sick human being when it comes to watching football. If it's on, I'm there pretty much. I'm really looking forward to week 0, which sounds horrible to the average fan, I'm sure, looking at some of the matchups. I mean, Dublin will be cool, but I'm looking forward to like some of the FCS matchups even. Like, just give me something that counts for somebody at this point. And I'm like this every year. I mean, but week 0 is fun because typically from in our life, Ole Miss isn't playing, so we're not kind of tied into something that's already going on. So we just get to kind of kick back, relax, and have a little bit of an appetizer for what the season will present. Not any massive matchups. I guess the biggest one would be the one in Dublin. But still it's football, and it's football that matters.
Yeah, and the way they have it set up, this is something kind of cool. It starts off with that game in Dublin, as it would, because that game is 5 hours ahead of me. But then it has like a game on Fox and a game on CBS Sports and all of that. And you can just see what is going on. SMU and Nevada kind of look, even though SMU is like a 28-point favorite in that game, I'm interested in what it looks like. I do want to see what the Mustangs, the ACC Mustangs, look like. That obviously that Dublin game is a huge game.
Yeah, and you want to get really in the weeds here. I'm talking 11 o'clock Central, Delaware State at Hawaii. Count me in. For some reason, I'm there. Like, it's just any game that late in Hawaii to me is always interesting because it just gets so weird. A lot of times that late at night for us, and yeah, I'm going to be locked into that one if I can find it.
Have they built a schedule? Built a stadium at this point?
I'm not sure, actually. I don't know now that you mentioned that.
Yeah, because 2 years ago when Vandy went over there, they basically just had a temporary facility put up.
Yeah, that's right. I had forgotten that Vanderbilt went over there. Yeah, that was fun.
And put a 60 burger on them. It was one of those sad days for Hawaii.
Yeah, right. Because that was not a good Vandy team that year.
No,
which I mean they haven't been for a while, but yeah, it'll be fun. Week 0 will be fun, and Dublin especially, like you said.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. John Macon Gillespie from Ole Miss on SSI. What have you got going on this weekend, bud?
Still obviously going to be talking about some fall camp stuff. There were some media availabilities today that we're going to kind of pull from through the weekend. And Jackson Harris is putting together kind of a position by position observation type thing that he's gathered from fall camp, the viewing stuff that he's seen. So that's been really good stuff. He's kind of seen a couple things that were interesting to him, and I think is interesting to the readers too. So it's fun, and we're getting closer and closer to the grind really opening up.
Yeah, and the name, by the way, before I get out of here, the name that I just keep hearing over and over again, it's the name that just appears, is TJ Daugherty, as a guy that is he's going to make a step this year.
I think so. I think that'll be huge. And I mean, we talked about it last week with the green dot thing for him. That should speak pretty high volumes as to what they think he's capable of.
Anyway, have a good weekend. I am going to be antiquing on Saturday all day because this is the last Saturday before my wife becomes a football widow, and she is going to make sure I pay for it tomorrow.
Well, hey, enjoy yourself. Maybe you'll run across something that you like.
Yes. I'm going to try and get one specific antique mall that is near me that has 3 real cool sports memorabilia places, and I see like autographs and stuff like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Anyway, take care, bud, and we will talk to you next week.
All right. Thank you, Steven.